Okay, welcome, Dr. Lawrence, whose title of her talk, I believe, is How to Teach Stress and Overwhelm. Um, uh, Chris Lawrence is a mom, partner, knitter, camper, hiker, licensed clinical psychologist, and somatic experience practitioner. She's currently the director of a large mental health private practice that employs 25 clinicians and has trained over 30 master's level students. She is founder and director of Heartspace Clinic, a nonprofit organization that offers a wide variety of services focused on building resilience in the face of traumatic stress through interventions that target the nervous system, including the Safe and Sound protocol developed by Stephen Porges. She offers workshops and training on these topics to a wide variety of groups and organizations. Thanks for being here with us today, Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Alice. And I'm happy to be here. I see some friends, Al and Mary Jo. Hello. Hi. I worked for Al many, many years ago at Family Counseling Center. So it's exciting to see him here. I kind of got my start as a clinician there and worked at McCambridge Center, which is a drug and alcohol treatment center for women and children, and hold that place very, very dear in my heart. I didn't know anything about working with substance abuse when I started there, and I stayed for 15 years. So I'm happy to see the two of you here. Yeah, so I started my introduction with the important parts of me. I used to introduce myself with my, degree and title first, and now I introduce myself with my, my relationships and the loves of my life first, which are my children and my partner, and then knitting and camping and hiking and doing all of those things because they're super important to my own resilience. We will probably have someone join us from Heartspace who's going to help me with this talk today, Sydney Young. So I'll let her introduce herself as well. But I am a licensed clinical psychologist. And about 8 years ago, I started training in something called somatic experiencing. And the first day, it was a 3-year training. I had to go to Golden, Colorado every 4 months for the training. I put had to in quotations because it was a lovely experience to go to Golden, Colorado every 4 months. But the first day of the first training, I called my partner and said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my career, because after struggling for many years with how to help people who had severe trauma, and coming at that work from a cognitive perspective, the way that somatic experiencing works is helping the body to feel safe, instead of using the mind to kind of teach the body that the world is safe. And it really turned everything that I did clinically around on a 180. And so Heartspace Clinic is kind of the outcome of that. And that's what I'm going to talk with you all about, is the work that we do at Heartspace Clinic. And then in particular, an intervention that we use called the Safe and Sound protocol. So I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see the presentation. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Just yes, nod. That looks fine.
Okay, great. Okay. Let's see. I am not able to move my Hold on one second, because I'm not able to move let me try. I had this all set up.
Take your time. We're good. Yeah. It's always, Zoom is so tricky.
There's always stuff, right?
Well, I would say, as I shared, I had to do this major download, and I had to do it the third time before it would let me in today. I was starting to think I was going to have to log in from my phone. I was like, is this going to work?
Well, and I was going to log in from my iPad because it has a much prettier picture of me,
Oh,
but
I liked the cat and the dog. I thought that was cute.
okay, exit full
That's what
screen.
you're trying to
Okay.
do. Dave Taylor is excellent. He can
Yeah.
guide you
Help you
things.
troubleshoot if you get
Okay.
stuck.
Yeah. All right, let me try to share. I may not be able to have it all on the screen the way that I would in person, but I think this is going to work. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to have to do it this way so that I can move from screen to screen. Okay, so who we are. Heartspace Clinic is a trauma and resilience informed organization that brings cutting edge information and interventions about trauma and how it impacts our nervous system. So what does that mean? So Barry Hart, Michaela Lance Simmons, and Daria Nashett did some research about what it means to be quote unquote trauma informed, because you'll hear that quite a bit now in the counseling field that, you know, we work with clients from a trauma informed perspective. So they define trauma informed as having a staff that has received training in trauma and that knows how to identify signs of trauma. Staff incorporates a trauma-informed framework into their interactions with clients, meaning that they understand that people have stories and deserve to be treated with compassion and respect. So lots of mental health counselors have this perspective. We all learn about trauma in grad school. I learned about trauma at the Cambridge Center because when I was in grad school, we didn't really talk about trauma. We also didn't talk about substance abuse. I had no classes on substance abuse. So I remember working at Cambridge Center and starting to make the connection that all of our clients who were abusing drugs and alcohol had a history of trauma. And we were just starting to put those two things together. So nowadays, everybody has what I would call probably a trauma-informed perspective. But then there's another piece of that, which is not only that you treat your clients from a trauma-informed perspective, but you also run your organization from a trauma-informed perspective. And so those researchers went on to also explain that trauma-informed organizations create structure so that staff can practice meaningful self-care, open spaces for members of the organization, institution, or business to speak about stress, foster a sincerely relational environment where everyone's dignity is respected, and provides resources for getting help for those that need it, including staff. So I run both Heartspace Clinic and my for-profit, Chris Lawrence and Associate, from these pillars, where we don't just talk about how does trauma affect our clients, but how does trauma affect us? And how can our organization support our staff in having appropriate work-life balance, in not overworking, in being able to take appropriate time off so that they can rejuvenate, and in applying the things that we're teaching our clients to ourselves. So I think that Heartspace Clinic is a true trauma and resilience informed organization because we apply these principles to our staff as well as to the clients that we work with. And I think my staff would probably agree. So what we do is we educate about the nervous system, and I'll share a little bit more about that. So we talk with our clients, and I'm going to say clients, but this is also, we work with new staff coming in from this perspective too. So we talk about how our bodies function when things are well, calm, and safe, and how our bodies function when things are overwhelming, stressful, and unsafe. We normalize mental health symptoms. So from my perspective, a vast majority, maybe 60 to 70% of mental health symptoms are really nervous system dysregulation. And we're going to talk about what that is, but it's the way I think about it is the body is reacting in a normal way to an abnormal situation. So the pandemic is a really good example of this. We have a lot of kids who are having fear about going to school right now, or how we might diagnose separation anxiety. Lots of kids with separation anxiety. And the way that I explain that to parents is, you're a person who is 7 years old. This little person grew up during a time when his brain was absorbing all of these messages during the pandemic, that two things that we need to survive were unsafe. the air that we breathe, and other people. So for 18 months, that was the message that we were hearing constantly. Wear a mask, don't go outside without a mask. There might be COVID in the air. Stay away from other people, 6 feet away from other people, because they might have COVID and you might. So these little people grew up with that message constantly. And now we're saying, okay, we're vaccinated. People are vaccinated. COVID's still around, but we know it's not as impactful in terms of being a life threat. So it's okay to go to school and not wear a mask. Why are these kids afraid to go to school? Because we can say that on a brain level, but their body doesn't recognize it. Their body, which absorbed that message, is still fearful and afraid. So that's just an example. So those symptoms that they're experiencing are perfectly normal, having grown up in a pandemic. We also teach about tools to help regulate the nervous system and to help the nervous system to function more effectively. And then we provide services as well. Let me see if there's anything else about that. So the services that we provide primarily are individual therapy from a nervous system perspective. We do a lot of education, groups where we teach the tools, and then the safe and sound protocol, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. I didn't say, but if you have questions that you want to put into the chat, I'll be looking for those. And if Sydney comes, then she'll be reading those to me.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Sydney.
So,
This is Sydney. Do you want to introduce yourself?
sure, yeah. Sorry, I was a few minutes late. Took me a minute to figure out the whole like login password situation. So I'm Sydney Young. I'm a therapist with Heartspace Clinic, as well as Chris Lawrence and Associates on the private practice side. I absolutely love the safe and sound protocol, which we will be talking about, and have ended up devoting a significant amount of my time to that, because I see how much of a difference it makes in people's lives. And on the private practice side, I actually specialize in working with people with chronic pain. So everything I do has to do with the nervous system. So that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
All right. You're on, girl.
All right. So this first image is just to give you an overview and to sort of demonstrate that the nervous system goes all throughout your body. It connects to literally every single organ, your skin, your muscles, and it's constantly sending out information to all parts of your body, as well as taking in information and sending it back to your brain. So we can go to the next slide. So this slide is intended to show sort of the different parts of our nervous system. Excuse me. Some of our nervous system is under our control. So like choosing to pick up your coffee cup, right? Your nervous system is telling your muscles to move and contract in a certain way. Other parts of our nervous system we're not under control over. So things like our heart rate, or the fact that our stomach and our intestines are like digesting our food, that sort of thing. So we can go to the next slide. So today we're going to kind of focus on the part of our nervous system that's not under our control. And this, you can think of it as the automatic or autonomic nervous system. And generally speaking, this is sort of a oversimplification, but generally speaking, we think of it as having two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And what I want you to sort of take away from this slide, has a lot of stuff on it, is that on the sympathetic side, that's what we typically associate with fight flight. Most people have kind of heard that terminology. It's what creates our stress response when we need to, historically like run away from a tiger. But today, that part of our nervous system tends to get activated when we open our emails and we see that there's like 20 emails that we have to answer. And then the parasympathetic side of things is the opposite. It is more the quote rest and digest side of our nervous system. And so when our nervous system is functioning well, we fluctuate back and forth between these two. This is where I think we can go on to the next slide.
Okay, I think
I'm
gonna kind of prep for the next slide. So if Is that
Is
next,
is it
Sydney?
or is the up and down slide not the next one?
Oh, not yet. Okay. All right. I was a little early.
Yep, you're good. So this slide is to sort of demonstrate that like back and forth between the sympathetic, parasympathetic side of the nervous system, that our nervous system goes between these two states all day, and that's healthy. So think about a moment when your alarm goes off in the morning and you have that jolt, right? And then maybe you realize, oh, I actually have like 20 more minutes to sleep before I have to get up and do anything. And then your nervous system sort of settles. Another example would be when you see lights and sirens coming up behind you as you're driving down the street, that like bit of anxiety or stress response that happens, that's your sympathetic nervous system. And then the lights pass you by and you're like, oh, okay, they're not after me. And then your nervous system settles. So these are examples of the sort of natural up and down that our nervous system does for us when it's functioning optimally, throughout the day. So before we move to the next slide, I just want to prepare you for it. It's nothing super like gory or anything like that, but I want you to just notice what happens when you see the slide. I don't know if Chris, if you wanted to add anything else
Yeah.
there.
So, and I would say, notice what happens in your body. So just notice your heart rate, your breath, that kind of thing. And just take a minute to just notice if anything changes for you. If your heart rate goes up, if your breathing gets a little bit shallow, maybe for me, my stomach gets a little tiny bit tight. That's an example of a sympathetic response.
For
right?
me, I feel maybe a little bit of like restriction in my chest.
Right, right. So all those things are your body's way of keeping you safe, even though this is something that's just on a screen, right? You still have that response. So then notice what happens when you see the next picture. So Sarah's smiling. And just notice if there's kind of any warmth that goes through your body, or just a little bit of feeling of relaxation. So this is my baby, Ruby. She's a Chiweenie and she's the love of my life. So that just a little tiny bit of an example is what happens when something shocks you and your sympathetic nervous system takes over. And then what should happen when something calms you and your parasympathetic nervous system takes over? You want to talk about this, Sydney?
Yeah. So this slide is just there's a lot on it. So don't worry too much about reading every detail, but it's demonstrating what I was saying before about how in a healthy nervous system, it's natural. I apologize if you hear my dog barking in the background. It's natural for our nervous system to have ups and downs, and we want that. These responses are natural responses to help keep us safe and to respond appropriately to our environment. And so our goal or hope is that that's what our nervous system does, that when stressors come up, our nervous system responds appropriately. But then when the stressor goes away, our nervous system is able to settle. But the next slide is showing what can happen when things aren't working so well. So depending on your history, culture, current life circumstances, etc., your body might have become more likely to get stuck in terms of a certain place within the autonomic or automatic nervous system. And so it can sort of get stuck in these stress responses. So even once a stressor has passed, the nervous system is still in that stress response, even though it doesn't technically need to be. So the first thing to notice about this slide is that it's a time continuum. And for this graphic, there's a traumatic event that happens early in the time frame. But what we're talking about can definitely happen when there's a there's not necessarily a single traumatic event, but it can be more like low-grade cumulative stress over a longer period of time as well, that can cause this to happen. So If you take a look at the various contributing events, you can see that there are lots of life circumstances that can contribute to a dysregulated nervous system, without there being like a specific thing that you might consider to be quote unquote trauma. So this is the sort of right side of the slide. So living as a marginalized member of society, experiencing racism, sexism, homophobia, growing up in poverty, growing up with a mentally ill parent who can't meet your needs, going through a pandemic, right? So these are all examples of contributing events that can lead to a nervous system that gets stuck in a stress response. We could also talk about generational trauma being a cause of this, but that would be a whole separate presentation. Okay, I'm actually wondering, like, if it'd be a good idea to pause and ask, does anyone have any questions about this? Thoughts to share?
I would add, as you can see, that when I talked earlier about mental health symptoms being about nervous system dysregulation, the stuck and on looks a lot like anxiety or panic, hyperactivity, restlessness, chronic pain, sleeplessness, hostility, and rage. And the stuck and off looks a lot like depression, flat affect, lethargy, exhaustion, chronic fatigue, some syndromes like fibromyalgia, that sort of thing. So you can have people in one or the other, or you can have people fluctuating back and forth. David or Carol, did you have a question?
Dave, from this graph, it appears to me that if a traumatic event happens, this seems to be showing that even though the traumatic event is over, the stress gets greater and greater as time goes on. Is that what it's saying?
Well, if you think about a traumatic event happening and then other things impacting that person, it's not necessarily that it gets greater and greater, although it's if you have these responses happening, then other people are responding to you in a way that probably increases your stress. So I think what this is representing is that the stuckness, as opposed to whether it's less or greater over time. So oftentimes what we see is that we might have clients that maybe had early childhood trauma but are doing well. And then this kind of traumatic event happens, either the pandemic or a divorce or the loss of a job. And all of a sudden they're not functioning so well. So their nervous system was doing okay and had kind of accommodated, but it doesn't have any resilience. And so then when something else happens, it kind of flips them into this dysregulated state on a regular basis. Good question. Any other questions real quick? Yeah,
Well,
Sarah?
Like Sarah does.
This is Sue well, I'm sorry.
Maybe you're going to get to
Thanks,
this,
Sarah.
so I hope I'm not messing up your presentation, but I mean, it seems to me like you just said that it's a normal response and it can look like depression and it can look like anxiety. So I wonder how many people are being medicated in our society for anxiety or depression when really this is the
No.
right.
You
Are you
just hit
getting
the
there?
bingo.
Did
Yeah.
I jump ahead? Okay, sorry.
No,
What did I ask?
you're fine.
Keep
You are
talking.
fine. That's a perfectly appropriate question.
Yeah.
And medication's great. And we, oftentimes we'll refer to psychiatrists, but it treats the symptoms and not the underlying issue. And so sometimes people can be on medication and then they're able to get some things in order and able to function better and maybe get a job that's consistent and get a job with benefits. And then they can taper off the medication because life is better. But if this is going on, then the medication isn't going to address this. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes medication is necessary so we can address this because things are so dysregulated in their system that they can't even benefit from the work that we do. But you're right on target in terms of our thinking too. I think, did Carol have another question too?
I have Sue I have an issue. I have a comment, not an issue so much, but I find if I'm around people and people get anxious about something or get real tied up and I find it myself tying up.
Yeah.
And I don't even, and I kind of almost have to step back a minute in my own mind and say, am I worried about this or not? Because I'll notice that I'm tense.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you're around folks that get tense, you're getting tense more often than you would normally.
Yeah,
is that a-
yep. Yep. Nervous systems are contagious. And some people are more sensitive than other people. And it can work in the opposite direction too. So in the opposite direction, if you find something or someone that is really calming to you, that can be an antidote to that. And we call that co-regulation. So if you think about babies who are upset because they're wet, and the mama picks them up and all she has to do is start rocking with them or holding them and they calm down, that's co-regulation. And it works in the other direction too. If you have a mama who's really stressed and anxious, that baby's going to pick it up. And we do that as adults as well. So yeah, that's a very good point. And doing that, like taking a step back, getting some distance. Sometimes I'll say, that's not my life. And that will help me kind of separate from it. But it's great that you notice it, Sue, and don't internalize it. That's you, that you recognize I can take a step back and that might not be me. That might be them and me just picking up them. Good point. Really good point.
I would add
Okay.
that since you're already
Yeah.
talking about it, this is one of the reasons why we work with parents. Like if we have a kid who's having struggles, like we look at the parent and make sure, okay, are they struggling to regulate their own nervous system? Because if we don't do that, then any help we give the kid is going to be pretty limited.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So some of the impacts of that dysregulation that's chronic and goes on are a feeling of being on edge or overwhelmed most of the time, chronic pain. The chronic pain is because, in part, a anxious or hypervigilant nervous system is constricted. And so it's tense and it's ready to take action, and that constriction causes pain. Being reactive to sensory stimulation, especially sounds, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Sleeping problems, attention problems, gut issues, being disconnected from other people. These are all the results of a nervous system that cannot accurately determine when the situation is safe or unsafe. So regardless of the situation, the nervous system is responding as if the situation is unsafe and there's something to be prepared for. So the things that we do at Heartspace, there's a lot of talking that we do, but we tend to minimize what normally is thought of as talk therapy, which is talking about your issues, talking about the problems that you're experiencing and how to solve them. We do a lot of that in Chris Lawrence and Associates, but in Heartspace, we tend to not do so much of that because what we find is the more you talk about the problem, the more restricted and tense the nervous system is going to get. So for us, nervous system work involves teaching people how to respond to their nervous system and prevention. So the responding is when they start to notice kind of moving into that hyper, like really tense, or hypo, like really shut down, how to notice that for themselves, and then what to do, how to shift. And then the prevention is ways to take care of their nervous system and doing kind of maintenance. And there's 100 different ways of doing that, but protection often involves things like not watching the news, staying away from media, spending more time in nature, spending more time with pets, and really letting it sink in when you're in nature and pets. And we teach people how to do that. And I could talk about that a lot, but I'm going to give you a little tiny bit of an example of that. Something that we would teach people to kind of help them to shift. So if you'll just take a minute and just notice for yourself where your tongue is in your mouth. And for most people, the tongue is at the top or the roof of your mouth. So just notice that your tongue is on the roof of your mouth, if it is. And then take a minute and just let your tongue relax. Just let it drop to the bottom of your mouth. And kind of imagine that it's like honey. And just let your tongue just kind of relax and settle in the bottom of your mouth. and then take it back to the roof of your mouth. And then again, let it settle at the bottom of your mouth. Sort of like it's melting. And then one more time, take it to the top of your mouth. And then let it melt. And what you're doing is just noticing if there's any other adjustment in your body that happens when you let your tongue melt. If you notice something, just raise your little screen hand. Sarah, you want to tell us what you noticed?
Really hard for me to let it lower down. It's so tight in the back where it's connected to my body that it's hard for
Yeah.
me to let it go. I have to really think about it.
'Cause
it
Were you
wants to be
able to
up.
do it at all?
Yeah, but I have to, but I have to really think about it. It really wants to be up on the top.
It wants to be up. And that's, I mean, that is a sign of a stress response.
Yeah.
So when you let your tongue drop, the other thing that happens, the rest of your body sort of drops. But it's hard to do. Another way to do it is to just, if people want to try this really quickly, just gently let the bottom of your jaw drop. You hold a lot of tension right here, Sarah, don't you? And you're noticing it now more. Yeah. Sue, did you have a comment?
Well, my tongue was down.
Was it already? Okay.
Yes. And I guess I'm kind of lucky because I'm sure it's been up earlier in the morning.
Did you notice when you raised it to the roof of your mouth, did anything shift or change?
I had to push it up there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay.
So in a sense, is that a good sign?
I don't think it's good or bad at all.
Okay.
At all. It's just what we do is we find the kinds of things that people resonate with. So for some people, and this takes a lot of practice. So we'll teach a tool to somebody and they won't notice it. And then we'll teach it again. And then we'll teach it again. And then we'll teach it again. And they start to notice it because we're not used to paying attention to those subtle cues in our body that things are awry. So there's lots and lots of tools. That's just an example. Some people really like that. Some people cannot relate to it at all, but we just try to find, we go in through the body.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, if it is it is down, it tends to mean that I am tending to relax. Is that right?
People who are relaxed tend to have their tongue relaxed. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And your business about saying about avoiding the media.
Yeah.
During the Trump era.
Yeah.
I finally just decided I had to get away from it because it was taking me down.
Yeah. It has a huge impact on us, and it's having a huge impact on our children. Yeah. Yeah. During that same
that's kind of what it's meant to do. Like the 24-hour news cycle, they're intentionally creating things that trigger that stress response because it keeps you coming back for more. There's a literal addiction that happens there. And so our news cycle is unfortunately no longer intended to like really inform us, but it's to keep us watching.
It's to hook us. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little example of what we do. So in July of 2020, I realized that what was happening, what was unfolding in terms of the COVID epidemic or pandemic was going to have a huge impact on all of us, but particularly on three groups of people: teachers, mental health practitioners, and medical staff. The reason I thought that is that those individuals were not only trying to help people who were being impacted by the pandemic, but were also being impacted by the pandemic. So we got some funding and we started doing what we call nervous system resets. So we did those twice a day, 5 days a week for probably about 9 months. And then we started to taper off a little bit. And those nervous system resets were about 10 or 15 minutes. And anybody who worked in those professions could join for free. And we taught a little teeny tiny nervous system skill like that. And over time, when people came, I think the first time we did it, we had like the first time we did it when school was in session, we had like, I don't know, 120 people attend. And the people that kept coming over the long haul really got some benefit because we were teaching them how to do those nervous system techniques, and they were practicing it over, many days and many weeks. We also did one-on-one meetings with those professionals for free. So all of this was for free. We did it for funding, and the one-on-one meetings were meant to teach about the nervous system and what was happening in our nervous system as a response to the pandemic. So we did that for 18 months while we had the funding. We worked with 96 one-on-one individuals. We did over 600 one-on-one sessions. At our peak, we did 200 interventions, the group interventions over a 12-week period. And then we kind of started to taper as interest tapered and our funding tapered. We are still raising money to work with teachers. As a result of this work, what happened is our staff became incredibly aware of how much teachers were being impacted by the pandemic. And that is continuing to go on. I just yesterday read an article in a study in the Psychiatry Advisors issue that came yesterday. And they gathered data between 9/20 and 3/21. So September of 2020 and March of 2021. And they found that healthcare workers had less anxiety, depression, and isolation compared to teachers, that teachers were the most impacted of all the people that they surveyed. And we just did a 3-day training with teachers, and that is continuing. Our teachers are in a really, really bad way. And so we're still trying to, continue to raise funds so that we can offer one-on-one services for our teachers. I don't know if you all are aware of this, but the public schools have healthcare, and the teachers have access to healthcare, but they have a $2,000 to $4,000 deductible. And so even though they come to see us and they say, I have insurance, I can pay for this, when we look at their benefits, they have a deductible, so they still have to pay a high rate. And so oftentimes they don't follow through because they can't afford that. So we're still in the middle of providing as much as we can to help the teachers in our community. Some of the comments that we had about that work during COVID, one teacher said, "This made a huge difference in my life. I feel more calm and relaxed and capable of making life decisions that will positively impact my life. When I began, I was in a pretty bad mental place. I felt supported, heard, and honestly much better through my sessions. The only thing I would change is that I wish I could have continued more sessions. We had to limit it at 10. So that's what she's talking about. I felt like I was in a crisis when I started, but learned how to manage my breathing and different techniques to help me stop and reset. And then these sessions had a profoundly positive impact on my mental health and well-being. I was able to learn valuable coping skills that will serve me well in the coming years. I'm very grateful to this program and my counselor." So that's an example of what we do. So the last piece that I want to teach you about is an intervention that we are really, really proud of the work that we're doing through this intervention. It's called the Safe and Sound Protocol. It was developed by Stephen Porges, who's a neuroscientist, and he studied hearing sensitivity. So he found that there was a lot of people who had either neurodivergence or mental health disorders that had hearing sensitivity. And he was really curious about why. And so he spent the last 30 years studying how it developed, what the impact was, and how to treat it, because he suspected that if he treated the hearing sensitivity, that it might help some of the other symptoms. So hearing sensitivity is found in people with PTSD, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, autism, and other things. Some people don't know that they have it. Other people say, yeah, if I'm in a restaurant and there are people behind me talking, I can't pay attention to the person in front of me. Or when I'm sitting at a meal and if it's really quiet, the sound of chewing is really grating for me. And they will also often say that it gets worse over time, which is sort of curious. So what Porges found is that if we start here with the darkest green, a person whose nervous system is chronically in a defense mode, so in that kind of hyper state, it basically causes our body to look for danger, because our body doesn't know, oh, it's just the news that's causing that activation. All the body knows is there's activation here, there must be danger. And one of the ways that the body starts to listen for danger is through our hearing. So in the jungle, if you heard the growl of a tiger, your body would immediately go into a defensive stance. So there aren't any tigers around us, but that low frequency sound of a tiger is all around us. So if you think about the humming of an air conditioner or the hum of a group of people, the body picks that up as a sign of danger. And in a normal situation, we screen that out and it doesn't have an impact on us. But in people who have a hyperactive nervous system, that becomes really fine-tuned and they start to pick up some of those sounds. And then the more sounds they pick up, the more activated their nervous system gets, because the body interprets that to mean there is danger. And then the more the body gets activated, the more that hearing starts to listen for those sounds. So it starts to become a cycle, which is why some people experience that as getting worse over time. So Porges did that research, found that, and then for 30 years, worked on developing a protocol to help fix that. And what came out of that is the Safe and Sound Protocol. It's an auditory intervention. It's music that is specially formulated to soothe, nourish, and reshape the nervous system. And it reduces auditory sensitivities. When I first heard about this, it was in the second year of my training in somatic experiencing. And my teacher said, oh, there's this thing that this neuroscientist is working on. And he told us a tiny bit about it. And I thought, oh my God, that is game changer, because it would explain why cognitive therapy is limited. Because you can teach people tools, but if their nervous system, if their hearing is still doing this thing, it's not going to have any impact. So we started providing the Safe and Sound Protocol about 5 years ago. It's delivered over a phone. There's an app that the client downloads. They listen while we are with them, and it's mostly through telehealth. And so they do something relaxing, knitting, drawing, playing a little game with their kiddo if their kiddo's listening, but they do something relaxing while they're listening, not reading and not looking on their phone. And the music stimulates the vagus nerve and it strengthens the muscles in their middle ear so that it fixes that tendency to take in sounds of danger. So it does two things. The music is formulated, let's see. The music is, the high and low frequencies are taken out. And so it sounds a little bit weird, but it's just mid-range frequency, which is essentially a sound of safety. And it's recalibrating the middle ear so that it takes in sound appropriately. So it's doing both things. The protocol, it's 5 hours typically of music. We deliver it between 5 to 30 minutes at a time. For some people, they're so sensitive that 5 minutes is all they can handle. If you think about a nervous system that's hypervigilant, if it starts to relax too quickly, what do you think happens? Any guess? Goes back up. It's not safe to relax. If you have a nervous system that's really, really, really sensitive, we have to create that feeling of safety in the nervous system very, very, very slowly. So for some people, we start with 5 minutes at a time. Other people can do 15 or 20 minutes at a time without that kind of distress. We deliver it 1 to 3 times a week. One of our clinicians is always present, and part of what we're doing is teaching if people have questions, but we're also watching the person for signs that it's a little bit too much. So I had a client recently who started rubbing her temples while she was listening. She started doing this. And so I immediately said, hey, are you getting a headache? And she said, yeah, a little bit. So I said, okay, let's stop and let's just take a little break. Most of our clients want to push through. They're like, let's just get it over with. I just want to listen. But if we do that, then we're actually overwhelming the nervous system, which is really going to give us the opposite of what we want. So it's super important that we're there so that we can kind of coach people through. This is what we're trying to teach you, is the first sign that something is amiss we need to make a shift and either stop, take a break, do a little nervous system settling exercise. So we make that call. So we're always present when people are listening. Some of the impacts that we see, and I've got some specific data in a minute, but it can result in reduced hypervigilance, better emotional regulation, better impulse control, being less reactive to triggers, increase capacity. So when a kid is in a fight or flight state a lot, they can't learn, because you can't focus with your brain if you're in a fight or flight state. Your brain shuts down. So we see kiddos who are able to start learning and paying attention in a much better way. And then just a better understanding. So people, because they're not so hyper vigilant, they're able to articulate a little better what's going on inside for them. And that happens for kids too. It's kind of amazing how kids all of a sudden have a feeling vocabulary that their parents didn't know that they had. So who could benefit from the Safe and Sound protocol? Before the pandemic, you had to have a history of trauma. And so people who had any of these symptoms and had a history of trauma, we could do the Safe and Sound. We have some funding for it, so I'll talk about that in a minute. After the pandemic, everybody can benefit from the Safe and Sound protocol, because that pandemic really changed the game for mental health. It has caused a huge increase in mental health need and a huge increase in anxiety, panic disorder, separation anxiety. And so now we don't even, I mean, we assess for pre-pandemic trauma, but that's not really a criteria to participate, because we were all affected by the pandemic. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Stephen Porges: if you want to improve the world, start by making people feel safer. And that's not a cognitive thing. That's a physiological thing, the feeling of being safe. The next time you're with your partner or with a pet, notice what happens in your heart when you spend some time with them. And oftentimes people will feel in their heart just this feeling of warmth. That's a feeling of safety. And that's not something that we can teach people with words. We have to teach them from the bottom up, essentially, with their bodies, to pay attention to that. So we have funding through the Boone County Children's Services Fund. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But we gather data, pre and post data with all of our participants. We get measures of anxiety, depression, and trauma symptoms before they start, and then 2 weeks after they finish, and 3 months after they finish. So this is just a graphic to show what our 2022 results were like. So this is for adults, and we had 2 measures of anxiety. The light green is at 2 weeks post intervention, and the dark green is at 3 months post intervention. So at 2 weeks post, 83% of people that took one questionnaire and 65% of people who took the other questionnaire reported reduced anxiety. So they took a questionnaire prior, we measured their anxiety, and they took one post, and 83% of people had reduced anxiety. 76% of people had reduced depression or trauma symptoms, and 82% had reduced depression. And you can see, with the exception of this one questionnaire, those results were consistent or the same at 3 months. This is the results for children, and this is based on their parents' report. So 64% had reported less anxiety at 2 weeks, and 63 to 75% had less anxiety at 3 months. And then 56% had less depression, and 88% at 3 months, and 62% had less trauma symptoms, and 67% at 3 months. And this is basically a repeat of what we had in 2021 and 2020 and 2019. It's very consistent. The only thing that has kind of stood out to me is that in 2021, this age group, kids, we did not see nearly the impact of the Safe and Sound as we have in previous years and past years. And I think that year, 2021, was just hellish for kids. And they were really, really impacted. Now we've seen that kind of change in 2022, and I hope that continues. So we have funding for the Safe and Sound Protocol for a certain group of the population. They have funded us for the last 4.5 years, and I don't anticipate that that will change. They pay for the implementation for children who live in Boone County and their parents. We oftentimes will get a child referred, and as we're educating the parent will say, I think I want to do it too. So I'm really grateful that we have that. However, we have to turn people away all the time because we have no funding for adults who don't have children. And so we can't do it with elderly individuals. I would love to do it with people who are elderly and have chronic pain, or I would love to do it in a nursing home. Sydney, wouldn't that be amazing? But we just don't have funding for that. We can't do it with college students or single individuals. So when we get donations, that's what it goes to. It either goes to funding for these individuals or for our work with teachers. And we're working on other possibilities of kind of bigger funding to be able to, what we want to do is roll this out across the state. There's one other mental health provider in the state that offers a Safe and Sound Protocol. She's in St. Louis. She doesn't have any funding. This is not paid for by insurance because it's an auditory program. It's not a therapy program that mental health providers can bill insurance. So it's almost all out of pocket, which is why we have to have funding in order to provide it.
Yeah, did you see the question about, someone said that do we take Medicare, and we can't take it for this because it doesn't cover, insurance doesn't cover this sort of intervention.
Insurance won't. We can, you know, if we have somebody who has, say, Medicaid, we can use Medicaid for our initial appointment, the intake. So there's little tiny pieces of it that we can bill insurance, but the primary intervention, we can't bill insurance for at all. They just won't pay for it. These are some books that could, if you're interested in learning more about the nervous system and how it impacts you, these 2 books by Stephen Haynes, Anxiety and Trauma Are Really Strange, are amazing. They explain this on a really easy to understand, interesting level. They're only $10. I keep them in my office and just give them to clients for free if it feels like it would be really helpful for them. The Mind Body Stress Reset by Rebecca Ledine is really good. And then Widen the Window is an amazing book about how to widen your window of tolerance in your nervous system. So for people who are interested, those are great resources. Here's some information to contact me. You can go to our website that has more information on there. If people are interested in donating, there's a link on there to pay or donate. We are doing Como Gives. And if you want to be on our mailing list, you can put your email address in the chat and we will take a picture of that. We do have a mailing list where we send out a year-end report telling people about all the work that we did that year. Because it's really an exciting time for Heartspace Clinic, because we're just really excited about what we do and really passionate about it. And we think that we bring a different lens to mental health than has previously been brought. We just feel really passionate about it and love what we do and love doing the Safe and Sound Protocol. So anybody have any questions? Okay. I appreciate your time. Thank you for hearing us out.
Oh, looks like someone's
Somebody?
raising their hand physically, maybe.
Okay, just speak up. I can't see everybody because I've got this screen up. So whoever has a question, speak up.
Would it be okay if I closed your screen so you could see everyone?
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody gets the contact information. So take a picture or take notes real quick. But yeah, I'll go ahead and yeah.
Chris, you said something about practice sessions. So that's when you're involved in the therapy, you do the practice sessions. Is that what you mean by that?
So sometimes we have, let's see if I can see that chat again. So right now, for example, we're doing practice sessions for teachers because we did a presentation in October and we had a lot of teachers who were interested. Anybody here could join if they want to. I do it myself. It's on Tuesday nights. I do a little bit of education about the nervous system, and then we do a practice, a nervous system reset. If is there a way that I could get information about that activity to everybody? Is there an email list?
Mhm.
Could I send that to? Okay.
Send it to pspring@socket.net and I will put it on our announcements.
Okay. What's that again, Cindy? Can you take that down?
pspring@socket.net.
Spring.net. Yes. Yes. So the question about
So
Medicare.
does that mean it's,
No, go ahead.
yeah,
Got it.
just Chris, to confirm that, is that on Zoom? Is it what?
Yeah, it's on Zoom.
It's on Zoom.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. People don't come to it face-to-face stuff anymore. We want people to come. We have to do it on Zoom.
Absolutely. Here we
Yep.
are.
So the question, can I address the question about Medicare really quick? So,
Sure.
taking Medicare is really important to me. I'm a Medicare provider. I don't take very many clients. We have 2 other Medicare providers. I would not say that they're and I wouldn't say that they're nervous system informed. The problem with Medicare that is going to get better is that they only credential PhDs and social workers. That has been the way it's been for many, 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 many years. And we have everybody in Heartspace is a licensed professional counselor. They're not a social worker and they're not a psychologist. And the legislature just approved licensed professional counselors to take Medicare this year. And so that is supposed to start to take effect in 2024. I can't imagine the overwhelm that the Medicare system is going to have in terms of credentialing all of those people, but we know how to do that. And we're actually in the process of filling out all the paperwork to send in on January 1st, 2024, because that has been a huge problem for people who have Medicare. They can't find counselors because of that limitation.
Medicare or Medicaid?
Medicare. Yep. Medicare. It's just, it's an old, outdated limitation that is not necessary and has really hampered the ability to find good mental health care. Because there are not many
But Chris,
providers.
Medicaid does allow counseling for their
Yes,
clients,
yes.
right? I believe.
Yep. And all of our counselors are Medicaid approved. We take Medicaid all the time.
Would you describe briefly the music again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, sure. So there's different kinds of music, but what we are using now is a classical playlist. So it's all classical music, and it's the high frequency and low frequency are taken out. So it sounds a little bit different, but classical music for your nervous system is really, really, really good for it. So if you, yes, and there's like, before they had this classical playlist, they had like a pop music playlist. So it was, and we don't hardly ever use that anymore. For kids, it's Disney songs, which work really, really well, but they're different because there's a special formula that they do that takes out certain of the sound frequencies, but it's all Disney songs. So it's really fun for kids because they're like, Nona, this is from Nona, or Lion King, this is from Lion King. But for adults, it's classical music. So, and classical music is soothing to the nervous system all by itself.
I definitely use that. I know when I need it and I turn it on right away.
It's so soothing.
Big difference. And the high
frequency
ranges hurt my ears.
They should, because
I do know that.
Yeah, high frequency. If you think about high frequency, when you hear a shriek, the body responds to that with terror. Because a shriek means there's something really horrible happening. Yeah. So that's why those high frequencies are taken out, because they also cause some distress in the nervous system. We just don't hear those as often as the low frequency sounds. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you for your questions.
I had a question
I
too.
think Sue, yep.
Oh, I love this, David.
Well, actually, it's more of a statement.
Mhm.
When I was 12, my mother had died a half year before, and there were two preschool brothers, and I flew with them alone to California, and I was with we were with our grandparents for a month, and then we went to Canada and spent the rest of the school year with aunt and uncle. But well, coming and going, I was in charge. But while there, I was given the responsibility by my dad to try to watch out for them. And then when I came back and dad remarried, I was told to no longer take that role. Now, it isn't quite what you're talking about, but that was a hard adjustment. And I also think, but that happens probably in a lot of low income families too, or, that the kids take on being the parent to fill in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it probably makes you more empathetic, but it also puts stress.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're not thinking in terms.
Right.
You don't usually think in those terms.
You're absolutely right. And it puts stress on a child's nervous system that isn't ready to handle that because they're not fully developed. And so you might not notice it, but it causes a lot of that, what we were talking about, that activation, that fear. I don't know if I have it to take care of my siblings. Who's going to take care of me? What's going to happen if, such and such happens? And so that's what I was talking about earlier, where people can go through adversity and function really, really well. Like they can function really well and there can be a lot of strengths. But sometimes what happens is then something else happens later in adulthood and they get completely overwhelmed and they can't figure out why. And it's because that nervous system was always kind of activated and then there's not much resilience in it.
Yeah.
So a divorce happens and there's just not enough resilience left over. And so then we have to kind of teach them how to bring that resilience back.
Yeah. The one thing that I learned with my grandparents, there actually was a step grandmother that never had kids. So she's older, doesn't have the energy. And I had to do so much more to help out than
Yeah.
I got to Canada. Not only did I have an aunt and uncle there, but I had two cousins that were right around my age. So I actually could relax, but I was given money because we were depriving that family of money because the one person that was still working didn't work that year.
Yeah.
And so I was supposed to try to help fill in on funds when I could. But as far as the day-to-day thing, there were 4 extra people to do what I felt like I was supposed to be doing. So it wasn't the stress.
Yeah. Alice, did you have a comment?
I put it in the chat. I realize you tend to work with children starting at 6 years of age in your therapy, but what about a toddler playing classical music after a 9-hour day of school and they've started to have a lot of tantrums and it's totally new behavior? Playing classical music
classical or Disney music would be helpful in that situation.
Okay.
We work with kids down to 18 months, actually, with the Safe and Sound protocol. So, tantrums after school is usually in part because they're having to keep it together during school, and then at home they're safe, and so they can just let it all out. But
Right.
yeah, Aladdin, Mermaid, Frozen, any of the Disney music can be really, it's either calming or it's activating in a playful way, which can help bring a kid out of a tantrum too. David?
And would you do it for like 2 hours, the 2 hours they're awake before,
Just
like
have it
they
in the
come
background.
home?
Just have it in the background.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's let David's question or comment be the last one.
I was
David?
wondering, is it, you said that what the music you use and have that high and low frequencies taken out, is that important, or is it available to the everyday person to go out and get that kind of, modified versions of these
No,
songs?
we can't. You can't just get it. In part because it's like I said, it's retuning the nervous system. And so we have to be present in order to help people not get overwhelmed, essentially. So we have a lease that the company allows us to use it. And then we have to be really careful. And if the classical music is sort of like a watered down, but it doesn't do the changes in the middle ear that the music that the SSP does. And so it's an intervention, it's a treatment. And so we want to be careful with it. And when Porges was developing it, he was really, really careful about making it available, because he was afraid that it was going to be used in a inappropriate or in a kind of willy-nilly way that might cause problems. And there are some providers across the states who are letting parents use it and not supervising. And there's constantly kind of a little debate in our Facebook group about how to help those providers do it more appropriately. We are very careful with it because, and I'll give you an example. We had a little boy who listened for about 10 minutes and he became really hyperactive and running around the house, and it really stimulated him. And so we made some changes so that the next time that didn't happen. And the changes we made worked. It didn't happen the next time. So we have to be there to make sure that we can intervene and it doesn't do harm. Just like medication, it needs to be prescribed so that you don't use it in a way that you don't know how it might hurt you. So
So it
thank
sounds
you.
like
I know y'all have a.
Does it sound like then you would not recommend parent just playing classical music or playing Disney music for kids?
No.
Oh,
Classical music is fine. It's not going to hurt. This is
even
the
with the high
special.
tones.
Yeah, but this is like if you take a song from The Lion King and you play that for your child, it's perfectly fine. In the SSP, the Lion King song sounds different because they took out the high frequency and the low frequency. So you can still recognize the sound, but it sounds a little bit different and it impacts your ear in a different way. Those songs by themselves are fine and can be really pleasant for people.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Everybody.
We appreciate you being
appreciate
here.
It.
We'll have the recording up on our website later this afternoon if you want to send anybody to see it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time.